For 11 seasons, Ed O'Neill did something remarkable. He made America fall in love with a man they were supposed to despise. Al Bundy was lazy, defeated, and perpetually bitter, a shoe salesman who treated his couch like a throne and his family like the universe's cruel joke on him. Viewers tuned in every week to laugh at his misery, and the ratings proved they couldn't get enough. But what most fans never stopped to consider was the complex, often painful reality unfolding just beyond the edge of their television screens. Ed O'Neill has spent decades slowly peeling back the curtain, and what he's revealed over the years paints a portrait far more fascinating than anything the writers ever put on the page. The truth is that Married with Children was never supposed to be the cultural phenomenon it became. It was a gamble, a provocation, a deliberate swing against the wholesome family sitcoms that dominated primetime television in the 1980s. And at the center of that gamble stood Ed O'Neill, a theater-trained actor from Youngstown, Ohio, who understood working-class exhaustion not from a script, but from watching it carved into the faces of the men who raised him. That authenticity was the show's secret weapon, and it came with a cost that O'Neill has only recently been fully honest about. When Fox approached the project that would become Married with Children, the network had a specific vision in mind. They wanted a recognizable name, someone with proven television credentials who could anchor an untested show on an untested network. Ed O'Neill was neither of those things. He was a character actor with stage credits, a handful of film appearances, and absolutely no household recognition. By every conventional Hollywood standard, he should not have gotten the part. But something happened in that audition room. O'Neill has described the moment in interviews over the years, how he settled into the chair, let his shoulders drop, exhaled with the particular brand of weariness that comes not from performance but from memory, and began to read. Creators Michael Moy and Ron Levitt watched in silence. That sigh, that deflation, that quiet resignation, it wasn't acting in the traditional sense. It was observation translated into physicality. O'Neill had grown up watching men come home from factories and foundries in Youngstown carrying a specific kind of tire that had nothing to do with sleep. Al Bundy was built from those men, and the creators saw it immediately. The network still hesitated. Weeks passed without word, and O'Neill assumed the opportunity had dissolved. What he didn't know was that Moy and Levitt were fighting for him behind closed doors, arguing that the kind of lived-in authenticity he brought to the room couldn't be manufactured in someone more famous. Fox eventually relented, and O'Neill got the call. What nobody told him in that moment was just how much weight he was about to carry, not just for the character, but for an entire fledgling network desperate to prove itself against the established giants of American television. One of the most significant secrets buried in Married with Children's history is the fact that the Bundy family viewers came to know was not the family that filmed the original pilot. When production first wrapped on the pilot episode, Kelly and Bud Bundy were played by entirely different actors. O'Neill has spoken about this in various interviews over the years, recalling that something about the dynamic simply didn't function the way it needed to. The humor felt disconnected. The rhythms were off. The invisible chemistry that makes a fictional family feel lived in and real was absent, and everyone on set sensed it even if nobody could precisely name it. Fox made the difficult decision to recast both children before the show ever aired. It was a brutal piece of industry reality. Actors who had filmed an entire pilot, celebrated with their families, and believed their careers had just changed forever, suddenly receiving calls that erased everything. O'Neill has acknowledged carrying a quiet guilt about that situation, understanding that the industry's mechanics, however necessary, don't soften the human blow. What came next transformed the show entirely. A 15-year-old Christina Applegate walked into the audition and delivered something immediately undeniable, a specific combination of sharpness, comedic instinct, and barely contained rebellion that the role of Kelly Bundy seemed to have been waiting for. David Faustino brought but a scrappy, wisecracking desperation that complemented O'Neill's world-weary anchor beautifully. Suddenly the pieces fit. The Bundy household finally felt like a place where real dysfunction could be funny, where the insults landed with affection underneath them, and where audiences could recognize something true about family life beneath all the exaggeration. What viewers experienced as effortless cynicism every Sunday night was, in reality, the product of grueling weekly work that took a mounting physical and emotional toll on O'Neill. Married with Children was filmed before a live studio audience, which meant every scene lived or died in real time. There was no safety net of canned laughter, no way to paper over a joke that landed wrong. When the audience responded, it was electric. When they didn't, the silence was crushing in a way that studio recordings simply cannot replicate. O'Neill has described the physical demands as something he genuinely underestimated entering the show. Al Bundy's comedy was deeply physical: falls, reactions, slow burns, sudden bursts of theatrical outrage. All of it required the kind of precise timing that looks casual but demands constant muscular control. By the middle seasons, O'Neill was managing back pain that he largely kept private, pushing through long filming nights that sometimes stretched well past midnight as directors chased the right comic rhythm between cast and audience. But the subtler toll was psychological. O'Neill spent more than a decade inhabiting a character defined by disappointment, bitterness, and the suffocation of unrealized potential. He has reflected in interviews that the line between performing those emotions and absorbing them was thinner than he anticipated. Al Bundy's particular brand of defeat has a seductive logic to it, a way of interpreting the world that, if you spend enough time voicing it, begins to color your own perspective. O'Neill has credited his work on Modern Family years later with helping him understand, in retrospect, just how much of AL's emotional landscape he had been carrying around without fully realizing it. For years, rumors circulated about tension between O'Neill and Amanda Bearse, the actress who played Marcy Rhodes, the Bundy sharp-tongued neighbor. Both parties deflected the questions publicly for a long time, but O'Neill has since addressed it with a candor that reframes the entire narrative. There was real friction, and it had a specific origin. In 1989, TV Guide published a cover featuring the show's stars, but only O'Neill and Katie Sagal appeared on it. Bearse and David Garrison, who played Marcy's husband at the time, were excluded entirely. O'Neill knew about the cover in advance and said nothing. He has since admitted that he regarded it, at the time, as simply the way the industry worked: the leads got the cover, and that was that. What he failed to anticipate was how that silence would be received. To Bearse, it felt like erasure, a quiet validation of a hierarchy that diminished her contribution to a show she had helped build from the ground floor. The atmosphere between them changed after that. Conversations became transactional. The natural ease that good ensemble comedy requires began to carry an invisible weight. O'Neill has said he recognized his mistake too late, and that by the time he understood how Bearse had experienced his silence, the damage had already settled into the fabric of their professional relationship. What makes the situation genuinely poignant is the irony at its center: two actors whose characters existed in a state of perpetual comedic warfare, now navigating a real and unscripted version of exactly that dynamic. The bickering between Al and Marcy remained funny on screen. Off-screen, nothing about it was. In 1989, a Michigan-based conservative activist named Terry Ricalta watched an episode of Married with Children and decided she had seen enough. She launched a letter-writing campaign targeting the show's advertisers, arguing that its content was harmful to American family values. The response from the corporate world was swift. Major companies including Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola pulled their advertising from the show, sending Fox into something close to institutional panic. Inside the production, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Writers began receiving notes about content. Crew members quietly discussed what a cancellation would mean. The cast, who had always understood the show as a satirical provocation rather than a genuine endorsement of the behavior it depicted, found themselves having to defend work they believed in while being forbidden by the network from speaking publicly. O'Neill has recalled the strange paralysis of that period, knowing the criticism was fundamentally misreading the show's intent, but being unable to say so because the network feared that any response would amplify the controversy. What happened next became one of television history's most ironic outcomes. The boycott generated enormous press coverage, and that coverage introduced Married with Children to millions of viewers who had never watched it. Curiosity drove people to tune in, and many of them discovered they loved exactly what Terry Ricalta had hated. Ratings climbed. The show emerged from the controversy not diminished but fortified, with a larger audience and a cultural notoriety that gave it a kind of rebel credibility no marketing budget could have purchased. O'Neill has described it with dark amusement, the attempt to destroy the show essentially guaranteed its survival. Among everything O'Neill has reflected on over the years, few moments carry as much weight as what happened during the show's 6th season. Katie Sagal, who played Peg Bundy, became pregnant, and the writers chose to incorporate the pregnancy into the storyline. The Bundys were going to have a third child, a narrative development that seemed to offer the show a new dimension. Then, in her 7th month, Sagal suffered a stillbirth. The loss was devastating and sudden. Production was immediately thrown into crisis, not only in the human sense, but in the logistical one, as an entire storyline now had to be dismantled. The writers resolved the situation by reframing the pregnancy arc as AL's dream, a surreal narrative device that technically solved the story problem but left the cast navigating something far more complicated on a personal level. O'Neill has spoken about this period with evident regret. He has described not knowing what to say, defaulting to silence because he feared saying the wrong thing, and realizing years later that his silence was its own kind of failure. Sagal returned to work still grieving and had to re-inhabit Peg Bundy's breezy, comedic energy while the people around her largely avoided the subject that was consuming her. O'Neill has identified this as one of the genuine moral failures of his time on the show, not a dramatic confrontation or an industry betrayal, but simply the quiet inadequacy of a man who didn't know how to show up for a colleague when it mattered most. After 11 seasons, Married with Children concluded in 1997 in a manner that perfectly, if painfully, echoed the spirit of the show itself. There was no farewell episode, no network send-off, no ceremony acknowledging what the cast had built together over more than a decade. The show simply stopped, and most of the people who had made it found out the way people find out about things that don't concern them, secondhand, accidentally, from strangers. O'Neill has told the story of learning about the cancellation while he was back in Ohio, staying at a bed and breakfast. A young couple on their wedding day recognized him, and the bride, assuming he already knew, offered her condolences about the show ending. He didn't know. He found out for newlyweds in a parking lot. Christina Applegate, when O'Neill later told her the story, laughed in recognition because her own experience had been nearly identical. A second-hand message passed through intermediaries, no call from Fox, no acknowledgement from the people who had built a network on the back of what they'd all created together.
O'Neill has described the feeling that followed as a specific kind of hollowness, distinct from anger. The anger came first, he has said, and then dissolved into something quieter and more permanent, the understanding that the industry's relationship to the people who power it is fundamentally transactional, and that sentiment rarely survives the bottom line. The redemption, when it came, arrived in the form of Jay Pritchett on Modern Family, a character who gave O'Neill the chance to play a father who genuinely loved his family, who evolved and softened and admitted his mistakes. The contrast with Al Bundy was total, and O'Neill has said that inhabiting Jay helped him finally understand